And my mic is not on mute because you can hear me. Last time had some technical difficulties. It's fine, guys. I'm a hot mess. How are y'all? So today we have Kaetrena Davis Kendrick. She has been very nice and let us use some of her time today just to talk about some diversity questions that you all might have. And I was going to just kick it off by saying that Kaetrena has recently been elected as ACRL's 2019 Librarian of the Year, and she works at the University of Southern Carolina, Lancaster, and she has been doing some work in diversity for a while now. I'm kind of obsessed with her, but she knows that already. So Kaetrena, if you just want to kind of, I thought we'd start by talking about how you got started in librarianship, maybe telling us a little bit about your background. I see you have your hand raised there. And we can mute our mic if you need it. Would you like us to mute our mic?
We
Allison?
should.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, because I can't hear you guys. I heard you just a few minutes ago. Did you mute your mic?
Yeah, we muted. Can you hear me now?
I can.
Yeah, so we just went ahead and...
Okay.
Yeah,
I haven't
sorry.
heard anything since you guys logged in. So I think that you
Okay.
muted that whole time. All right.
Okay.
Okay. I was just wondering. I felt like I was in the void.
Ask her if she can bring her camera down just a little bit.
I can sit down.
Okay.
There we go. Much better.
Yeah. Okay.
I just basically introduced them, introduced you to them, let them know that you work at USC-Lancaster. I didn't tell them your life story. So basically, I was going to mute my mic to let you kind of tell us a little bit about your background, and then we'll go into the questions, if that's okay with you.
That's fine.
Sound great?
Yeah.
All right. So I'm going to go ahead and mute.
Alrighty. All right. Hello, everybody. Thanks, Ashley/Tori, for inviting me. I'm happy to talk with you guys today. I think you guys sent me some questions about diversity, and I want to be clear that I'm hoping we're talking about racial and ethnic diversity, because one of the concerns that I often have is folks use the word and I'm never sure what they mean when they say it. So, and sometimes they don't mean the same things that I mean. So, my name is Kaetrena Davis Kendrick. I am a graduate of the historic Clark Atlanta University School of Library and Information Studies. I graduated, in 2004, I think. I started in public libraries and then quickly moved to academic libraries, where I've been since 2005. I started at a large institution in Georgia, and now I'm at University of South Carolina, Lancaster here in South Carolina. I think I'm about 3 or 4 hours away from you guys, I think. I lived in Charlotte for a little while, and now I'm in South Carolina libraries. So I think you guys have some questions for me today. Tori, did you want to run through those questions, or you want me to just kind of go through them, or how do you want to do it?
Yeah, so you can run through the questions that I've sent you. Okay. These are questions that our students, just to give you guys context online, we sent out a couple of posts asking for your questions, and this is just some of the ones that we have. In addition, if we get through those questions and we still have a bit of time left, I do have some follow-ups in case we need them,
Okay.
because we have, I do want to pose one question to you that isn't on the form.
Okay.
But yeah, if you want to just go ahead and get started with that, go for it.
All right, so I'm just going to go through these questions, and I will give succinct answers, and then if you all have follow-up questions, I'm happy to do that. So I'm going to run through the questions. The first one is I'm going to read them verbatim like they're sent to me because context is key. So just in case whomever submitted the question wants to give me more context, that's fine. But I'm going to give you the question that is so all the questions such as they were offered to me, right? So the first question is, we've got diversity coming out of respective ears, but without the power, trust, and authority to go with it, it's lip service. What are the largest obstacles standing in the way of actual inclusion in libraries today? So hopefully, again, we're talking about racial and ethnic diversity. I'm presuming that's where that question is, the word diversity is coming from. When I talk about diversity, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about racial and ethnic diversity, particularly when it comes to folks who are perceived as underrepresented or marginalized in North American society and all those spheres. So this is an interesting question in a way that was posed because the answer is sort of in the question, where it says we have diversity, quote unquote, coming out of our respective ears, which implies to me that it doesn't mean anything anymore. We've heard it so much that it doesn't mean anything anymore, or perhaps there's a sense of overwhelm, and you're not sure where to start. And that's one of the obstacles is that people talk about it so often that it's beginning to mean nothing. And I think I talked about this a little bit at Diversity Day. There's this concept called the God word, and a God word is a word that means everything and nothing. And so Lorna Peterson talked about this a long time back in the 1990s in an article where she said, and this is why I do what I do. I define what I mean when I say the word diversity. And so that's one thing we need to do is start defining what we mean when we say diversity. That's an obstacle because nobody knows what that means anymore. And it's a sense of overwhelm, and that's something that I face even with our own work. You almost feel almost responsible for all the things. Like you can't be responsible for knowing all the things. You have to determine what diversity means to you and then stake your claim on that particular area or aspect of diversity because you can't do all the things, and that goes to you just can't. So that's one obstacle. Another thing I mentioned at Diversity Day in terms of actual inclusion is we have in our national organizations for the past few years now seen people who are from perceived traditionally underrepresented groups, African Americans, women, Latinx, people who are now leading our organizations. They're the figurehead of, say, ALA. You have Loida now. She's Puerto Rican, Latinx. We have Miss Brown, who's African American. In ACRL, we had Courtney Young a few years ago, African American woman. And ACRL, we had Trevor Dawes, African American man. And then we've had folks even years prior. E.J. Josie was one of the first executive directors of ALA. So, but the problem is there may be, because we see people in leadership positions, they may be thinking, oh, well, since they're reaching leadership now, we must have reached the pinnacle. We've achieved diversity. But what's happening on the ground is when we see things like what happened at Midwinter, there's pushback coming from the actual membership in terms of diversity. So we need to be aware that just because people are in leadership positions or figureheads does not mean the goal has been met per se if the membership is pushing back on inclusion on the ground. So those are two big obstacles I see. Those are the largest obstacles, the idea that we've met some goal because people of color are leading or in leadership positions. And by the way, this is not a slight to anyone who's been in a leadership position before, but I also want to make clear that a person who's in a leadership position doesn't necessarily mean they're a leader. It means they're in a position. And I want to be clear that I'm not making a statement on anyone who has led the position. I just need you to understand that you want to make that distinction as you move forward and think about leadership. The next question is, does anybody have a question about what I've said so far? Or are there follow-up questions? All right. And you can unmute your mic, and I'm also kind of looking at the chat too. So I'm of the opinion that it takes a while to form questions. So if I said something 3 minutes ago, don't feel like you can't jump in and say, well, that time I'm an introvert, so I understand what he said some 5 minutes ago. So I guess I shouldn't say anything. It takes a while for questions to form. So if I said something 10 minutes ago and you want to jump in now, I can stick by what I said and go back to it, and we can have a conversation anytime. So know that.
Yeah, and I just
Um,
wanted to, can you hear me?
yes.
Okay, I just wanted to hop in for anybody who doesn't know about, I think pretty much everyone here does, but just to give that context again, ALA Midwinter, there was a committee meeting where a librarian from an underrepresented group, she was African American, experienced harassment from another person in that committee. And if you just go onto ALA Connect and just
You can go
read
to her
some
website.
things.
It's April Hascock. She's a
Yes.
counselor,
Yes.
and her blog is called at the at the intersection. So just go there
Yeah.
and read it. She wrote about it. Go read it.
Yeah, Allison, we actually have that link on our CritLib website. If you want to do the work to hunt that down, if not, don't worry about it. But we actually talk about this in our Critical Librarianship Book Club as well. So just to give you that guys that context of what that situation was about. So
And yeah. So and that's just the latest in the litany. So if you go back, we have problems. It's not just the people who are having these experiences with colleagues. It is things that our leadership is doing. People that represent us are doing, like the hate room policy that happened last year at conference. So we're talking about libraries as safe spaces for people of color, and the how that kind of slipped by, and we had to go back and rework that. So this, certain sorts of false equivalencies moving forward from the membership, which implies that there's pushback on diversity, uh, and how that plays out for not only people who are coming to the library, but people who work there. The next question is, what advice would you give to someone who is not a member of an underrepresented group, white, CIS, gendered, and female, but is interested in supporting diversity? A sort of general advice for beginners. So my first idea when I read this was, if you're a woman, you're underrepresented. So it's interesting that you don't see yourself as underrepresented because you're underrepresented in the largest, you're marginalized. So keep that in mind, and I think that's one of those intersections that Caucasian women may forget in librarianship because they're the majority in librarianship, but actually in society you are perceived that you are underrepresented in many ways. And I think that's where a lot of friction comes from in diversity because the perception is from people of color that Caucasian women forget that they are underrepresented. And so when things happen, that's how they end up not progressing along with the people who they are oppressing. Does everybody understand that? That sort of friction. So that's the first thing, is that if you're a woman, you'll want to rethink how you're perceiving yourself because it doesn't seem to be in line with how it really is. If you're a woman, you're already underrepresented. So keep that in mind. So if you're talking about representation in terms of the profession, you are overrepresented. Yes. Um, but I say that to keep that in mind about how you're actually represented in society. Just like I'm only a librarian when I'm at work. I'm only a librarian when I'm at work. So, and a lot of things that happen in political spheres affect my workplace. So, things that are happening politically, like right now, they want to defund libraries again. So, I don't know if y'all know that they want to defund libraries again at the federal level. Um, if you want to, but as a person who is overrepresented or highly represented, whatever word you want to use, the majority in librarianship proper, this sounds very trite, but you're an aspiring librarian, so I'm going to offer you the opportunity to read. Read. And there's some things I'm going to offer you to read. So one is, you probably heard about it. If you're doing CritLib, you probably heard about it. Read everything that Robin DiAngelo writes. Read everything that Robin DiAngelo writes. So White Fragility, she wrote that. Um, and then there's another one she wrote. For those of you who are going into academic libraries, there's another one she wrote with um, Oslim Sensoy, and it's called "We Are All for Diversity, but dot dot dot," and it talks about how faculty hiring committees reproduce whiteness when they're hiring at the for faculty on faculty campuses. So it's just about being aware of hegemony and how hegemony is being reproduced on college campuses through hiring practices. And another thing is there's another one, you probably heard about it, called Algorithms of Oppression by Sophia Noble. So what that kind of shows you is how centered you are in society. Like if I'm looking for stuff, images and stuff I can't even find. There's a lot of stuff I can't find when I'm doing like graphic work or something like that. If you go to Pixabay or Unsplash or anything like that, there's not photos of people of color being human. Like we eat salads and smile and drink water, and there are lots of things that we do that we don't have stock photos for. Does everybody understand that? How you're looking for something like, I just need a picture of a black guy reading. That's not LeBron. Okay? Like, can I get that? You can't find, it's very difficult to find that imagery. And Sophia Noble kind of talks about how folks are marginalized. And, this goes down from, information seeking to, we're in technology. And, we talk about AI, how artificial intelligence doesn't even see my face, literally does not see my face. So when you're thinking about information architecture and technological architecture and innovation and things like that, think about how invisible the centering of whiteness is. So there's lots you can be thinking about. And I'm not saying you have to walk around thinking, oh my gosh. Again, you shouldn't feel overwhelmed. However, when you think about it, you should act on it. It's almost like bystanderism, being marginalized in a marginalized group. If you can perceive it, is everybody here understand the idea of being bullied? Has anybody seen that? Everybody seen that? Either been bullied or excluded, or have watched it occur. One of the reasons it occurs is because of bystanderism. Everybody knows what bystanderism is, when the person watches and then no one says anything, and then later on they might say, ooh, I saw that happen, but, A, B, and C. Yes, that's the same thing that happens to marginalized people writ large, but about their race. So they'll, so that's why I say, it shouldn't be a constant thing, like I got to be aware at all times. However, when you do become aware of something where you realize you have a privilege, you should immediately act to equalize it. Does that make sense, everybody, what I'm saying? Because I can't live your life and say, now you'll resent it if you're always thinking about it, right? But if you recognize, while you're at work, I'm standing here and this person of color is standing beside me, why did that person come and ask me and didn't ask her? Or if you hear a microaggression, why did you ask Sarah where she was? Why did you ask Sarah where she was from? Call people out, because those types of things make life hard for people of color. Because what we do is we get questioned when those things happen. We say we're too sensitive and things like that. So just be aware of how invisible your centering is. And then work to equalize the centering, okay? So I don't say, I'm not going to sit up here and say people should decenter themselves, because that's sounding like, kind of mean or whatever, but you can equalize the centering. You can bring somebody in. You can say, I know someone who does that, or, and a lot of this is ego too. So another book I would recommend too is this book called Ego is the Enemy. And a lot of things that happen are because people's ego get involved. So I'll leave that there. And a lot of reasons why this hasn't moved forward, even more diversity and inclusion, whatever, is because people's egos are involved. And I believe there's enough for everybody. But if you don't believe there's enough for everybody, you probably will hoard. I'll put it that way, right? Does everybody understand that? Yeah, and everybody thinks someone else is going to say something, but the truth of the matter is the ethical person just takes the lead. Ethical people just take the lead when something is amiss. They don't wait for somebody else to take care of it.
Kaetrena?
Yes.
I had a follow-up question for you.
Hi, Kaetrena. I'm Lisa O'Connor. I'm the chair of the department here, and I'm really enjoying what you have to say. I was wondering if you could talk just a second about the balance in the continuum between being a bystander and doing nothing and being the white savior who comes in to, rescue everyone. How do we, as we go through our lives, make sure that we're not doing, that we're maintaining that right space in being an ally.
Well, I would hope that, when you come onto a campus or you meet someone, you make yourself known as a welcome person from the jump, so you do your groundwork for allyship before the tomfoolery occurs. And then you'll know if you're welcome, if your allyship is welcome, because see, sometimes your allyship is not welcome. Sometimes people make things worse. They can be paternalism. They can be paternalistic in their allyship, right? So allyship is not paternalism. You do not know what's best for me. Um, but I think anybody would, like, I think April would have really appreciated somebody at that point saying, "Hey, Joe, what are you doing? You know, what are you doing, Joe?" That's, because that's an obvious situation where, that's obvious. Um, and then, if something happens right then, the first time you can say, it depends on what the situation is. There's so many instances that I don't have a pat answer for that. And because I
Yes.
don't live in a white space, I don't know what would be. I think it's up to the individual, and hopefully the individual to whom whatever is occurring will be able to tell you what they want, but also lay the groundwork for ahead. A lot of things happen. If you read the low morale research, a lot of these things are trigger events, right? So you'll be there working for a couple of weeks or a month or so, and then something will happen, you know. Or, another thing is you can lay the groundwork before that person even comes. And that's why I say read that thing about hiring practices. If you do a really great job of gathering a great committee who's really committed to treating people like humans, um, and then also considering you want a committee who's treating people like humans and is also committed to diversity, whatever that means for your institution. And if you're aware of how you're reproducing that hegemony, then you can work to make it better. And another thing too, being on a academic campus, no one has ever called me and say when they asked me to come for an interview or whatever. Has anyone ever called you and said, "Hey, we're thinking about going to these places for dinner. Do you have a preference?" No one's ever done that. I mean, I'm coming anyway, so you might as well just ask me. So little small things to make people feel welcome, just like that, you can lay groundwork. There was a person in a room just today, and she looked like I think her last name was it looked Latin Hispanic, and she just went to a campus interview, and it was an all white search committee, and they took her to a Mexican restaurant, and so she left that space thinking, did they do that on purpose? You know what I mean? Was it contrived that, oh, she's Mexican? We perceive that she's Latin, so she wants Mexican. But I don't know if that was the case, but she walked away feeling like that. So little things like that, like, can you get outside of your head a little bit? So sort of just getting outside of your head. I don't know if I'm answering your question, um, but
I
okay.
think my
I
mic
don't know if
is
I'm
muted.
answering your question, but part
You're
of the
not
reason I
muted.
feel like I can't is because I'm not in your space.
Yeah, I just wanted to get you to reflect on that from your
Yeah,
perspective a little bit. That's great.
yeah, yeah. Um, Could you provide us with, my next question is, could you provide us with some specific suggestions for actions peer librarians can take to support diversity in their organizations? Well, there's lots you can do. If you are, and it depends on what kind of library you're in, first of all. So a lot of things I do for my campus to make sure I have started groups that I felt like needed on campus. So I mean, if you get to know me, well, you got to find out. I'm a lover of Korean popular music. I love it. I love K-pop. And so, when I was at my previous institution, there was no Asian American Studies group or whatever on campus. So I started that bad boy because I wanted somebody to talk to K-pop about K-pop. And I found those people. And so, one. And then when I came here, I started working with Trio. I wanted to work with the international students. So I put yourself in places that are not like you. Put yourself in spaces that are not like you. Everybody has something that is inherently not supposed to be them. Everybody has something in their personality that's not supposed to be them. Like as an African American, I'm not supposed to like Korean popular music, and I'm not supposed to. There's lots of things I'm not supposed to be doing and not supposed to be interested in. And everybody has that aspect of their personality that they're not supposed to be doing. Well, I'm all into all the things I'm not supposed to be doing, and so I put myself in those places where I'm not supposed to be. So put yourself in places where you're not supposed to be. And sometimes that's uncomfortable because I mean I've been to Korea 3 times. I still know no Korean, but I'm going a fourth time knowing no Korean. So because I want to be where I'm not supposed to be so I can learn. But being where I'm not supposed to be, I got a research grant to be where I'm not supposed to be. Um, so that's my major thing is be where you're not supposed to be doing things that you should be doing. Um, so whatever that means for the organization you're working in, and so that's a lot of places. So, but when you go into those places as people who are not of color, if you're not of color, when you go there, ask, you'll want to ask for permission if you can, be quiet for a little while. Like when I go to these places, I'm just like I listen a long time before I start talking. So I go where I'm not supposed to be to do things that I'm supposed to be doing, and then in order to gain allyship, I'm quiet a lot, and then later on, I'll say what I can. I try to see what I get in where I fit in, and hopefully make things better. I hope that's my answer. I don't know if it's good for you, but it's worked for me. Um, and then how can libraries recruit and retain diverse individuals, especially those libraries that are located in non-diverse areas? You know, if I had that answer, I would be like a millionaire. I mean, that's the question. Um, but I would say treat them like they're professionals. So when I think about this question too, the thing I immediately thought about was the residencies. But what happens in the residencies is they are not treated like full professionals. So they're treated like children sometimes, and the feedback that comes back to me. Um, they're treated like children, like people who go to libraries. Like I presume everybody in this field, you've had other jobs. This might be a second career for you. You've done other things. So you're an adult, and so what happens is when these diversity residencies happen sometimes, particularly when they're happening in rural areas where there's not a lot of racial and ethnic diversity, and these are large monolithic libraries that have had the same people working there for X number of years, 10 years, 20 years, so on and so forth. Um, the folks are brought in to run a program, and they're not allowed, they don't say, well, this is what I'm interested in, I would like to learn this. It's just here's the program, and you're going to run it, you're going to do our program, right? So that kind of stuff really turns people off. It would turn anybody off, but it's just particularly ironic in residencies because those are the things that's supposed to be diversifying the field, and you're literally turning them off and they want to go elsewhere. So treat people like treat people like professionals, like colleagues, right from the start. If you treat a person like a colleague right from the start, they're probably more likely to stay. And I'm not talking about, toxic collegiality. I'm talking about like a true colleague, like you expect that they have a certain level of knowledge. And we also recognize that not all the curricula are not the same. And so there will be gaps in our practical education and our formal education. And so model those skill sets and give them an opportunity, give them professional development. I acknowledge that because of those gaps in the education people are struggling with, if they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, I think it's called imposter syndrome. So if we recognize that those types of things are happening because of our gaps in the education, because of the inconsistencies across all the schools, and you treat people like a colleague who's supposed to be learning all the time anyway, they're much more likely to stay. And then also, a person asked me at Diversity Day, if I'm at a public library, how do I get people to come? Well, have you looked around to see if there's a full life for a person of color in your community besides church? Nothing wrong with church, but I mean, a person who's coming wants to know that there are places and spaces for them to go, and that people that things that they like, they have an opportunity to do that. Um, find those places. So again, that's that idea of going where you think you're not supposed to be, but you're gonna have to do some reconnaissance. Can a person live a full life if they come work for you in your area? Those are some things that I think about automatically when I think about areas, rural areas, and trying to get people non-diverse areas. If places are already non-diverse, that means that's an implication that I can't have a full life there. I have to drive out or drive somewhere or something like that. Everybody understand that? Those are all the questions I had.
Yeah, so I actually, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, just want to double check, make sure I'm not in the void as well. But I actually had a question submitted just a minute ago, and it says, how should we, as members of non-marginalized groups, tread the line between asking for help in becoming educated from marginalized populations, but don't expect them to take on the work?
So what kind of help? Well, it's better if you come, from me, from my perspective, if something happened and you want to have a conversation with me, I probably would not be down to be like telling you all the things, trying to start you from zero. However, if you came to me with an educated framework or saying, I read about such and so, and I did blah, 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 what's the best way for me to blah? So come from an educated, you have to read first, or at least acknowledge the centering that's already happening, from my perspective. That's my answer.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have any questions online that you guys were thinking about? Again, like Kaetrena mentioned, it takes a minute to form a question, but if you have anything in the chat or you want to use your microphone, we'd be happy to have that going on as well. Sorry,
While
go
you
ahead.
guys are thinking, the reason I'm going to be really transparent, I really wanted these questions to come from the group, because if you talk about another obstacle is we say we want to do things and we want diversity, and then when there's an opportunity to have a discussion about it, you gauge the room, and there's a certain level of the theoretical interest. You want to see if that matches the practical interest, and I think that's another obstacle, is that oftentimes the theoretical interest does not match the practical interest, and that's one of the reasons why we haven't moved forward as quickly as perhaps these issues should have been resolved by now. So there's that.
Hey, Kaetrena, I've got another question for you, and this sort of comes from my own background. You mentioned that leadership, being in a leadership position, isn't necessarily leading, and I just couldn't agree more with that. I came to a position of leadership sort of unwilling. I didn't plan on this, and as I look back, and I think this goes particularly to what you were saying about women, being a woman. When I thought about leadership and leading, I had a very distinct thing in my mind that I thought leadership would look like. And as a woman, maybe an introvert, I didn't match that. And I've come to think that maybe I had a very male model of leadership in my own mind. And so I was wondering if you could just reflect on what, maybe I also have a very white model of leadership in my mind. So what do you think about, leadership models? And I just reflect generally, broadly, on what you think makes a good leader. And I don't know. Okay. That wasn't a very well articulated question, but
that's fine. I can say that I don't perceive outside of being culturally competent when you're working with people, I don't perceive that there's a racial model of leadership. But I do believe in cultural competence because you have to be aware of where people may be coming from when they come to you with their concerns and problems and questions and issues and things like that as a leader, and they're looking for guidance, assistance, reference from you. I also, so there's that. I am a believer wholeheartedly. I am not a formal leader. I have never been a formal leader. I am not currently the director of my library. Doesn't seem to be on the horizon. I have never had a manager position, I've never been a supervisor, a manager, except my own space and my own work. I've been Kaetrena the Associate Librarian, Kaetrena the faculty member, Kaetrena the librarian. I don't have a formal title or leadership. However, I perceive myself as a leader because I like to get things done. And I get those things done according to an ethical framework, ethical decision making, and for the betterment of my library. And therefore, I think about the campus, but I think about it from a library perspective. I know that for me in this library, if this library is doing great, then the campus is going to be doing great, and I have the data to prove that, right? That being said, I'm an informal leader, and I believe that's the most powerful leader on the planet because I don't have to be able, I don't have to figure out how to say what to whom and where. All I'm concerned about is what needs to happen. So while I am collegial and I am polite or whatever, civil, when I need something done, I'm very upfront with what I need done. And I'm very clear about what I need done. And I'm also very clear about what's going to happen if it doesn't get done in terms of their bottom line, what they feel is important on my campus. So I believe very much in the power of informal leadership. I believe I've been able to do a lot more than I ever would have as a library director. Um, so that's my take on it. Um, it's worked. It's something that has worked very well. And I also believe I'll say this: I have a great colleague, and we're on the same page in terms of what we want to happen. And so I think that also helps when you have folks who also want the library to be the same type of successful you hope it will be.
Does anyone have any questions online? While we're waiting, if anybody doesn't, that's fine. We're almost at our mark anyways. But I actually, oh, we got one. Thank you, Brittany. Okay, I'll let you read that. I'm gonna shut up.
People do this all the time without. This is something that happens all the time. So yes, it can be done ethically and without bias, because people do it often. I think it's about the research design, and that comes from having sound research methods and creating your questions. So if you have really good questions and you have a really good sound survey research model, and again too, you can't say without bias. Just FYI, there's always going to be some bias there because you're human, and so you don't know everything that is driving those. Whatever the thing you're looking at or observing or trying to get to, there's a motivation that ultimately you will never really understand. You can get really, really close to it, but you're never fully going to understand it because, you just can't, you're not a body snatcher. So you always have some bias there, but you can get rid of that bias. That's one of the reasons I like qualitative methodology, particularly phenomenology, because it allows me opportunities to examine myself when I'm looking at my data, and I have to tell myself. So like with my low morale study, if I thought low morale, they were going to talk about like low pay, because that's what the research said, right? So they're going to tell me, these people are going to come tell me and talk about the low pay they have, or the you know they wish they could go home earlier. They wish they had, more paternity leave, maternity leave, something like that. I thought it was going to be, the faculty members treat me this, don't think I'm a real faculty member. That's something that happens a lot in academic libraries. So I thought it was going to be stuff like that. Now, if I would have not examined myself, I would have said, when the people were telling me what they were telling me, which is stories of abuse and neglect, I would have said, well, no, this is wrong. They're wrong. They're wrong. They're wrong. I have to do it again. Something's wrong with my question. But qualitative methodology, phenomenology in particular, allows me something called epoch and bracketing, where I can. That's one way for me to reduce my bias, and sit back and say, what are my own triggers? What are my own concerns? What are my own faults about my own line of thinking about this topic? And I can sit back for a little while and then come back to that data and say, okay, Kaetrena, realizing that I've had a bullying experience long ago. Is this coloring how I'm doing this data? You need to set that aside and see what this person is actually saying in the context surrounding that statement. So there's ways to do it. So just know there's ways to do it. It's about what methodology you're choosing, what kind of question you're trying to answer, and if those methodologies match the goals of your research. And there's lots of ways to do that. And people look at other people all the time that have nothing to do. I mean, I did research on Korean librarians. Clearly, I'm not Korean. Clearly.
I have kind of I'm not. I mean, I've done like a small case study research, but I'm not experienced in that. So where would you put that in the actual? This is really technical, but would you put that in limitations or talk about that in like? You don't want to talk about yourself, but you also want to address.
No, you put it in the methodology. It depends on what methodology you're using. So when I talk about like like for the one I did just now I just finished a study for racial and ethnic librarians of color and low morale. And so I'm a racial and ethnic librarian of color. And so when people were telling me their stories, I had to work really hard to divorce myself from experiences that are very similar so I can report this data out fairly. And so I had to do a lot of epoch and bracketing. So I did a lot more mindfulness stuff. I did a lot more, like I would take huge breaks from the research. Like I would just not even look at it for a long time until I was I would never look at it. As soon as I knew I was getting, as they say on the street, feeling the type of way, I would just put it down and walk away because I knew that if I kept reading, then I'm forming opinions about what may or may not have happened to me or that story my other friend told me or whatever, and then that's coloring the data. And all thing that matters is the data that's in front of me. So we talked about that in our methodology, things that we did to make sure we were divorcing to reduce our bias and looking at the data. That was
Okay.
because that's part of because you have to talk about it in methodology because you have to let them know how that data is being treated before you report it out.
Yeah.
Make
Yeah.
sense?
Okay. Yeah.
Make
Totally.
sense? Okay.
Does anybody else have any questions for Kaetrena?
Brittany, did I answer your question? Okay. Be really clear on your research methodology and figure out how you're going to reduce your bias. You can't get rid of it, all of it, but be aware what your biases are. If you know that you're looking at a group that is very culturally different from you, you need to find that's actually part of your methodology too. When you're thinking about why are you looking at this group, like I had to say, if you go to the Korean study, the Seoul study, I talked a lot about this is why I'm looking at this group. They're so different from our own culture. So I'm aware of these differences. And these are the differences that I find very intriguing and why I'm talking to them because this is how we do it in the United States. These are the things that are happening in their country, and I want to know what the parallels are. They think they're parallels, but they're a little behind the continuum a little bit, even though they're very much more technologically advanced than we are. They're behind the eight ball on a lot of things.
Okay. Well, if no one, yeah, anybody? Anybody? Thank you very much for coming to talk to us. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day.
Oh, it's my pleasure. If y'all have any questions, I'm available to answer them. I'm glad, Allison. If You have any questions or comments or, follow-up questions or sentences, words? Shoot me an email. I'm at Kaetrena, Kae. Oh, hold up. I'll just type it in. Hold on. I'm going to type it here. You can contact me here. Um, and wait, what happened? Oh my gosh, this thing is too cute. It's telling me. It's hearing me typing and it's telling me. Anyway, that's my email, and I'm easily findable on the interwebs. And if you're going to be at NCLA, I'm planning on being at NCLA's conference this year. So maybe I'll see you there.
Okay. Yeah. I'm just so
Thank
happy.
y'all for coming and taking time out of your day, you guys. I know you'll do a lot to improve the profession as you move forward in your education. Oh, sorry. I think I just sent it to. I'll redo it. I didn't. I just sent it. I'm sorry. Sorry. My bad. I sent it to. I was being secretive and didn't realize it. Everybody see that?
Yeah.
There it be.
And just for everybody who's here, we'll post the recording of this as soon as we can get it processed, and we'll put up. I'm thinking, Allison, what we'll do is we'll post the recording and mention some of the resources that Kaetrena has mentioned, such as like the book.
Oh, let me put them out here. You want me to just type them in here?
Sure. Yeah, that would be great. And I can.
Already in a listy list.
Ooh, I like lists. Okay.
Listy list. Kaetrena's prepared.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So feel free to share the posts when you see them. Tell all your friends, essentially, because this is really great information to have. And I think everybody who does or doesn't want to be a good person should hear this. So just all I'm trying to say is if you see it on Facebook, hit a like, hit a share. Allison would really appreciate it. I would really appreciate it. And I'm sure Kaetrena would really appreciate it as well. But we just kind of want to share as much as possible about this topic and what we're talking about. So, yeah.
The last one I didn't mention, I want to tell you guys this too. Another thing about when you're thinking about decentering yourselves, you need to remember that LIS has been segregated. And Dr. Cook has been talking about that. Dr. Nicole Cook has been talking about that more and more recently. Yeah. So that's a video a talk she had about her discussion of segregation in library and information science. So one of the reasons you should know that I mentioned at the beginning of our talk that I'm a graduate of the historic Clark Atlanta University. That's one of I say historic because for a long time it was the only school that was educating people of color to become librarians. So, and before that it was Howard University, and then it moved to Clark. All right, and that school is now defunct. So, but I mean, what that tells us is that even though librarians were saying long before, the Code of Ethics was written in 1930s, 20s, or something like that. Then updated in 1938, then updated again. But anyway, we had these Code of Ethics, and we're all about all the services and everything like that to all the people, but they weren't. And another thing is, not only were they not to people of color, but so much so that they didn't want to serve. And one of the big things about library values is that we're here to serve, right? But they didn't want to serve people of color unless you were immigrants. Now they would serve Irish people and people coming from across other lands and things like that were not of African descent. But even then, that was because they wanted to assimilate people to quote unquote whiteness. And then there's this other side of it where we're actively not allowing people of color to come into the library, or they have their own libraries. And when you consider that they wanted that to occur so much so that they didn't even want them to be trained in the same spaces, that didn't happen until much later. And Dr. Cook talks about that in terms of what happened at her own institution where she is now at Urbana-Champaign, and how they started that program there, and all the things that those folks went through, that first group of that first cohort of people of color going through the graduate school when they integrated the graduate school there. So
Yeah, I added her.
and it still happens now. That's why these things now, when I say about the pushback on the ground, that harkens back to segregation in the beginning, where libraries weren't safe spaces. They would criminalize people of color for coming to the white library. And if you see Hidden Figures, they kind of may allude to it. So Caucasian women were upholding this type of thing. The librarians were saying, we don't want it. I think in Hidden Figures, the woman goes into the library, and the lady comes and says, we don't want any trouble. But she was literally just pulling the book off the shelf. What are you talking about? Anyway, so stuff like that, where these missteps of library values being subverted for local norms and local rules, which means people weren't being served and weren't being helped and weren't being offered improvement in terms of lifelong learning and stuff like that. So I say that to say that's what Nicole talks about in that video that I just shared. And so when you think about how centered you are as a person who is not of color, keep in mind that centering happens because of racism, active racism, active things like segregation and things like that. Centering basically is, segregation is basically legal centering of whiteness. Okay, so keep that in mind.
I added her book that she wrote. I ruined her last name, and I apologize for that. But it's Information Services to Diverse Populations, and she actually also talks a lot about diverse recruiting and how it can't just be students. It has to be faculty members. You have to get people to a point where the diversity is in, the racial and ethnic diversity is in faculty members and not just students, because you're not going to continue to retain a student population that is racially and ethnically diverse if they don't see faculty members who represent them.
Correct.
And that's a big point that she makes, and I thought that was very, I would recommend that book. The reference sections is a great place to start if you're looking for more research and pedagogy on diversity in LIS. It's like she did 20 years of research and put it all in that book and just gave it away, and it's amazing, and I would highly recommend that book. So yeah.
When you read that book, read All for Diversity too. That'll kind of be a nice little foil for recruitment. Yeah. Are there any questions, concerns?
What was the book again? You said Awful Diversity?
Oh, the thing. We are all for diversity, but this is our.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. I was like, what?
Diversity, but how faculty hiring committees. So read that book
Okay,
with Dr. Cook's book. Read that article.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, and another thing. Oh, okay. Another thing. Oh my gosh. Another thing I really like about the article "We're All for Diversity" is they make a really great point in that they say very plainly, we are both white women, and this is one thing that they say we are white women, and we're writing this basically because it needs to be written. It's almost like they're saying we're writing this as white women because we know if African Americans wrote it or somebody of color wrote it, we're using our power to help. Basically, we're using our power to center this problem. So that's another reason why I like that article. So in terms of being an ally, and you can tell this to your department chair too. If you use the power that you have for good, because whiteness does carry a lot of power in this country, and it's very invisible. And so it'd be great if it's wielded for good, because right now my colleagues tell me that it's wielded for abuse and neglect, really, particularly from Caucasian women. But more on that when it's out. But just know that real talk, whiteness is dangerous for a lot of people of color, and it's so invisible too. So just know that. Know that your colleagues are. Juno Diaz said it at Midwinter 2 years ago. It's very difficult suffering, a lot of suffering going on in our profession. It doesn't mean you shouldn't come. And I'm not saying that to freak people out. It's a great profession. I really enjoy my job, and I think all of my colleagues enjoy their jobs. And also, just like any profession, everywhere it has its problems. And, all I'm saying is if you have an opportunity to reduce the problem, please do so. Thank you.
Thank you. You're amazing. And I love you, and I'm sorry if that's unprofessional.
I like to be loved. Yeah, this is exactly what it is. It's free. The article is free. Thank you, Joy. It's free. I like free.
All right.
If y'all have any questions, or if there's anything I said that you wake up tomorrow morning and you say, I don't know, email me tomorrow morning and I'll respond. All right.
All right. Thank you all so much for coming. We really appreciate your presence here, and I will send you the recording as soon as possible, Allison.
Y'all take care. Bye.
Bye.